Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you a Goosebumps TV show episode review from the original classic Goosebumps TV show from the 90s that aired on Fox Kids. And today we're going to be discussing the two-parter from season 1 that wasn't an R.L. Stine special like Stay Out of the Basement, and we're going to be discussing Welcome to Camp Nightmare. Now, I do have the One Day at Horrorland DVD sealed because the show is still on Netflix. I haven't had the reason to open it. But if you turn it on the back, it does say Welcome to Camp Nightmare. So this is what I'll be using to review the episode for. Now, to preface this episode review, I am reviewing this episode in conjunction with the book based on the contest I held, or I guess the Q&A celebration contest conjunction thing I did, where the Gamer Brothers was one of my 3 winners, and I'm reviewing this to kind of coincide with the book. To add to that, this episode, two-parter, was an episode that I never watched until maybe Cartoon Network or The Hub. It was one of the later ones I got around to, so I never really had childhood attachment to this episode. I read the book as a kid. Never really watched the episode. And I was a big fan of the book. But on this watch through, and I guess this is me like reading a bunch of Goosebumps, I think I've gotten more picky about things. And I'm starting to notice my flavor and my taste and stuff is starting to kind of like morph. And I'm starting to kind of give a real idealized version of what I look for and what I'm after. This episode, for it being one of the episodes I've seen probably fewer than most, speaks to me on so many levels. This episode was directed by Ron Oliver, the screenplay written by Jeff Cohen. Jeff Cohen wrote this episode, not Dan Angel or Billy Brown. And as far as from what I've known about Jeff Cohen, this was really good from Cohen to make this. The screenplay felt great. Ron Oliver, I have no idea how Ron Oliver is able to interject so much of his personality into episodes. I still don't think this is the best Ron Oliver episode, but it has Ron Oliver screaming all over it. Sorry, that was getting kind of mixed there. Oliver and all over it. Sorry, but yeah, it just screams him, and you don't even need to know. If you watch the show enough and know who's directing episodes, you don't even need to know that Ron Oliver directed this episode. All you have to do is watch it without the credits, and you can assume that it's him. I mean, it's so Ron Oliver-esque. And it's hilarious. It's, in my opinion, a little bit better than the book. In a lot of ways. I think it's a more digestible version of the story. I think it ties together better, especially by the ending. And Saber, which is the monster on the iconic cover, which I have set right here. You know, Saber on the cover, you know, is utilized better here. It's just, this episode has so many strengths that when I get to my book versus episode, I think for the first time, the episode might have a shot to win out. I mean, it's really good. I mean, this episode's fantastic. It's not my favorite episode, nor is it nowhere close to being my top 10. Most likely my top 15. But I just think I think at this point, I know I haven't reviewed a couple, but I think I have my permanent top 10 pretty much solidified at this point. But this episode is still great. It's still fantastic. I love a lot about it. I can't wait to talk about it. This is a 2-parter, so there's a lot to go over. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. Alright, so the episode starts off with a bunch of kids on a bus. And it's revealed that these kids on this bus are heading towards a camp. And it's called Camp Night Moon. And the main character we follow is named Billy. And Billy is this kid. You learn kind of a little bit about him with Billy's parents and how they're like scientists, and how they go on expeditions and stuff. And Billy's looking for his own little adventure in Camp Night Moon for the summer. And on the bus, you kind of see this cavalcade of characters. There's a lot of characters in this episode, but you really get to see them come out and shine when the bus abruptly stops in this random deserted corner out in the middle of nowhere, and the bus pulls off, and all these kids exit the bus, boys and girls, and you meet a bunch of characters. You meet these two girls named Dawn and Dory. You meet these boys. You meet Colin, Mike, I think Roger, and Jay. And cast of characters there, and the bus driver pulls out their suitcases and then drives off and leaves them there. And this freaks everyone out. Everybody starts to panic a little bit. They look over into the woods and see this creature rustling in the leaves and coming at them. And it looks like this big beast creature, and it's known as Saber. And then they find that out, of course, after the fact, after this whole event happens. But what happens is that this big explosion happens. Very reminiscent to Cry of the Cat, but not as cringy. But a big explosion happens, and this guy with a flare gun is putting away his flare gun. He reveals himself to be Uncle Al, and he tells everybody that was Saber. And people are like, "Who is Saber? What is that thing? What is he?" And he's like, "It's an it." Like the book. I think in the book, I think that was Larry's line, but in the episode they changed it to Uncle Al. But anyway, Uncle Al reveals himself to be the camp runner for Camp Night Moon, and he's there to split the groups up into boys and girls. The girls are going to head off to the girls' camp, and the boys are going to head off to the boys' camp. And so the girl counselor takes the girls, and then Billy says goodbye to the two girls, Dawn and Dory, but he has particular affinity for Dawn, kind of like the book. Might be a romantic interest. If you haven't read the TV book, which I'll get into reviews after this, Billy in the episode is apparently 13. So he's 13, he's like officially a teenager. Feelings for girls are there. It's kind of implied. But then Uncle Al takes him to the boys' camp, and a group of boys, mainly the boys I mentioned, Billy, Jay, Colin, Mike, and Roger, they're all marching in a line, and you kind of get a hint of their personalities. Mike is kind of a needy kid. He's kind of a whiny kid. Jay is more into the adventure. He's hyperactive. Colin is this guy dressed in all black with a bandana. He has this bad boy mood to him, like rebellious type. And then Roger is this wisecracker guy with a bunch of jokes that Billy doesn't find funny. And they're marching through the woods, and then they eventually end up to their cabin, which is known as, I think, Cabin 4 or Bunk 4. And all the boys go in and pick out a bed. And when Billy picks out his bunk, on the top bunk, he sees this sign that says, "Saber is hungry." And they're starting to ask questions, what is Saber? But that gets interrupted when the kid Mike, the needy kid, sees a snake in his bed, and he cries that he got bit in the hand by the snake. And Billy immediately knows what to do. He takes the sheet and wraps it up with another one of the boys, and they take it and throw it out the window and dump it out. And they check on Mike. His hand has been bitten. Says it hurts. And then comes in the camp counselor named Larry. Now, Larry's actor here, I don't know this guy's name, but he's like two actors put together. He's like this character actor guy, I think it's Sean W. something. He's been in movies like Never Been Kissed, and he's been in a couple of other movies, like I think Employee of the Month, that movie with Dane Cook. He's one of the supermarket guys. He's one of the managers. This camp counselor Larry looks like a mixture of this Sean W. whatever his name is, actor guy, mixed with the voice of John Heater, guy who played Napoleon Dynamite. Larry's actor is quite a peculiar choice, but it works splendidly well here. But Larry marches in and asks why they were doing that with the bed sheet, and they had to reveal that Mike got bit by a snake, and then Larry says, "Oh, I might have bandages for you," and they start asking questions to Larry. about, like, is there a nurse? And Larry said, there is no nurse. We don't have nurses here. And of course, this freaks the kids out, and they have an event to go to later that night, which is like this campfire event where Uncle Al's going to be singing and playing songs for people. And Mike has to go now with the snake bite on his hand. So Billy has taken it upon himself to be the watcher and the nurturer of Mike. And this is the quality that the guy who plays Billy, mind you, I haven't even gotten to his actor yet. The guy who plays Billy here is so good at playing this character. I think his name is Kaj, however you say his name is. I forget his last name. Erickson or something. And you might know him if you're Are You Afraid of the Dark fans. He was the main lead in the episode The Tale of the Dead Man's Float. That iconic episode. He plays Billy so well here. And he really sells that Billy feels so much empathy and apathy for Mike. So at the campfire, when everybody's trying to have fun and listen to some songs, he can't keep his eyes off Mike, wondering if he's okay. And checks on Mike, and Mike's hand is swollen. Now, keep this in mind. Mike got bit in the hand. It was bleeding. They wrapped it in bandages. But Billy had never at one point checked to see if a bite actually existed on his hand. So keep that in mind. So Billy's taking care of him, talking to him, and then this upsets Uncle Al, and he comes over and interrupts their conversation, says, hey, why are you guys interrupting my song? And Billy's like, oh, he got bit by a snake. And Uncle Al's like, oh, let me check it out. And he's like, oh, you'll be fine. It'll be fine by tomorrow. And Uncle Al at first was upset with Billy for talking with Mike, but then he tells everybody that Billy's the number one camper and that he was mistaken. Billy was just trying to help a fellow camper in need, and that's a good exemplary act. So this kind of makes Billy feel a little bit better. Mike had a snake bite. It should be better tomorrow, and Uncle Al's not mad at him. He's actually proud of him. So Billy can sleep with a better conscience. It cuts to later that night, and the boys are out exploring where to go. And they're thinking about maybe trying to find Saber, because Saber is fresh on their minds. And Billy's kind of against it. He has like a really sound mind. He's like, we shouldn't do it. And then they hear these weird growling sounds. I think that this creature is following them. So they run back to their bunk and they close the door. And then it cuts to Saber, the beast monster, roaring into the night. The next morning, everybody wakes up, and the first thing Billy notices is that Mike is missing. So he is wondering where he could be. He wanders outside, and he tries to go to this part of the woods where he sees some rustling. And then he's interrupted by this guy named George. Now, George is an episode exclusive only character. He's the bald guy with glasses. You might recognize him from the intro montage. For some reason, that character always stuck out in my mind as a kid. And since, like I said, I never watched the episode as a kid, so I always saw that in the montage. I never knew where it came from. Then years later, when I watched the episode, I'm like, oh, that's where it came from. George is this weird, like, upstate New York accent guy. He's telling him that, so Billy mentions something that's like, I'm just looking for my friend. He goes, you have to talk to Uncle Al about that. That kind of thing. And then the boys, it cuts to them going to play this thing called, I think, skip ball or wiffle ball. They're playing something that requires, it's kind of like baseball. Billy's distraught about Mike. Mike has just disappeared. He doesn't know where Mike is. So he goes to the diamond where everybody's playing, and it comes up to his turn on his team to bat, and Uncle Al's, of course, umpiring the game. And he asks Uncle Al about what happened to Mike. And he's like, Mike, who's Mike? He's like, the blonde kid. And he's like, oh, the kid from last night. Don't worry about him right now. Just focus on having fun. He's trying to avoid the questions. Comes off weird to Billy, but he's like, okay. And, of course, starts playing. He gets on base. And then a whole thing happens when Larry tries to tag out Colin, who was running to third. And Colin was safe, according to Uncle Al, and this really upset Larry. So when it comes to the next play, Colin is running home to score a point, and Larry has the ball, and he just beams it right in the back of Colin's head. And this really makes Billy upset, and he calls Larry out. So he threw it on purpose, and he was like, "No, he was in the baseline." I think in the book he said he just claimed it was by accident, it slipped or something. But Larry's like kind of a jerk about it, and Uncle Al agrees with Larry, like it wasn't on purpose. But Colin's a bit shaken up from getting hit in the head, and Uncle Al tells Billy that you should take him back, let him go get some rest. You guys need to be ready to go do survival night for the following night, because it's going to be their bunk's turn to go out and camp in the tent. So Billy's like, okay, and then he gets back into his nurturing mode when it comes down to the point in the episode where they go out camping in the tents. He sits back with Colin to keep an eye on him, and Colin in this episode is hilarious. He's wrapped up in this sleeping bag. He's like the head delusional, and he has these really funny one-liners, but he's just laying there like it's funny. If you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about. And then comes in Jay and Roger. Jay and Roger, Jay the eclectic kid, and Roger the wise person, or not so wise person. And they're like, we're gonna go to the Forbidden Bunk. Now the Forbidden Bunk is this place that Uncle Al has forbid all campers to go, and he says it doesn't have to explain it because it has forbidden in its name. You shouldn't go there. And this was kind of given with his rules at camp, like got to be in bed by a certain time and wake up by a certain time, and you got to write home every day to your parents, stuff like that. Those were specific rules he gave to the campers when they first got to camp. And this is also another thing that he told the campers to stay away from the Forbidden Bunk. But the boys being boys, they just want to go search it and just do things because it's forbidden. So Jay and Roger venture off to the Forbidden Bunk nearby, and Billy sits back with Colin. Then Billy hears some screams. He gets out of the tent, and he sees Jay running to the tent and running in. And he said, the thing got Roger. And all of a sudden it pans into like Colin. He's like, oh, Saber's coming, stuff like that. And then the boys, of course, have to leave the tent because they hear this roaring. They try to go find Roger. They can't find him. They're tripping over themselves. They feel that Saber's following them. They make their way back to their bunk and they hide. And Colin squirms under the bed in this little worm thing, this worm sleeping bag. And in busts in Larry. And Larry's like, what's going on? And they're like, Saber's here. And this is right around the time where the part 1 ends and part 2 begins. And Larry's like, stop playing jokes. And they're like, no, Saber's out there. And he's like, stop playing jokes. He's like, they got Roger. And he's like, we don't have time for this. We'll look for Roger later. And the boys reluctantly stay in and try to talk with Larry about it later. So it cuts into the next day. The boys are determined to go talk to Larry about what happened to Roger, or I think more specifically Uncle Al. So they go to Larry to try to find where Uncle Al is. And Larry says he's in charge. You have to go through him. And basically the boys are told to get ready for swimming, and that Larry will pass the message on to Uncle Al about what happened to Roger. Now, before this all happened, Billy gets kind of worried and wants to call his parents because he's starting to get really freaked out about this place. And he finds the phone nearby the lodge where Uncle Al sleeps, and he has this really creepy encounter with Uncle Al, and Uncle Al's wondering why he's trying to call home, and the phone's a prop phone, it's not real, and that and once Uncle Al sees that he's making Billy feel uncomfortable, he says, you should just write home. That's what you should do, and go have fun and go swim. And Billy's like, okay. And then he asks about Roger, and Roger is revealed that, according to Uncle Al, he never existed at the camp. And this really freaks him out. He's starting to think that something really bad is happening to people at the camp. People are missing, maybe dying, and he doesn't know what to do. He feels like he probably should go tell Jay and Colin. But when he goes to tell Jay and Colin, he meets Larry, and Larry tries to put a life vest on him, and then Larry throws out life vests to the other two because they don't have them on while they're canoeing in the lake. And Jay and Colin try to jump and get the life vests, and then they start to drown. And Billy has this instinct to go save them and jump into the water to try to save them. In the book, it's a little bit different. In the book, he actually saves Larry from drowning. But in the episode, it's changed from Jay and Colin getting lost on a hiking trip to now Billy's trying to save them. And while this is going on, Larry runs away, and Billy can't seem to find him. Another thing to remember, he's right next to the canoe that tipped over, and he went under the water to look, but didn't go check underneath the canoe specifically. Just remember that. Okay. So, Billy pulls himself out of the water. He's really scared. He tries to run into the woods, and then he thinks he hears Saber following him, and he makes a break for his cabin. And now he's the last one left, and he starts to feel really creeped out. He doesn't know where all of his friends are at. He's really scared, but he has to do something. So he gets some dry clothes on. He gets a baseball bat and a flashlight, and he makes his way to go search. And then he finds these letters strewn around in front of the Forbidden Bunk, and he goes inside by himself, and he follows the trail. And then he's greeted by Dawn from the girls' camp, who basically reaffirmed that what's going on at her camp is happening at Billy's camp too. After they have the conversation, they both realize that this place is really creepy, and they find this bag of mail with all these letters that supposedly were supposed to go home that never were mailed out. So this really freaks Billy out, and he overhears some talking outside, and he sees that Uncle Al has dressed all in camo and has organized this group of boys outside. So he goes outside to meet them, and Dawn is going to continue to hide out in the cabin. So when Billy meets up with them, he sees that they're all being lined up and given crossbows. In the book, it's more rifles, but they're being given crossbows, and Uncle Al has been giving orders for them to fire at this missing camper from the girls' camp who's left. And this freaks Billy out, and he's finally hit his breaking point. He's like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. And Uncle Al's like, what do you mean you're not going to do that? And he's like, I'm not going to kill somebody. And this whole scene happens. He's like, we're not trying to kill, we're going to tranquilize. And Billy stands up to Uncle Al, and there's this big, tense moment, and then something happens. After this event happens, the entire story wraps up essentially, where where this big revelation happens from Uncle Al to Billy about what's going on. There's a big wrap up with some characters coming back, and Saber's there, and what's been going on to Billy and the campers at Camp Night Moon. I mean, it all gets summarized there. And that's essentially how the episode ends. I can't go into any more detail without spoiling it, okay? But that essentially is Welcome to Camp Nightmare, the episode. Now, the strengths on this episode, like I said, the pacing is really great. Ron Oliver put his charm into this. The humor was on overdrive. The character performances rocked. Some characters were improved, like Jake was less annoying than the book. Colin was hilarious. Larry was hilarious. Billy, Cash Erickson, did a phenomenal job playing Billy. Billy's character came off way more, I think, better than the book. I think he just came off more concise, more heroic, more consistent. The atmosphere felt good. For the budget they had, they really sold me on the camp atmosphere. Even though it was minimalistic, it really worked. The music was really fun. The Saber animatronic was fun. The explosion in the beginning was fun. Uncle Al's performance was killer. The guy who played Uncle Al, I think he's no longer with us, but man, what a good performance for Uncle Al. A lot of great things to be had with this. The ending, I think, is better than the book because they add some more context the book doesn't have. It's so good. This episode's so good. But its negatives. Like I said, remember the whole thing about the canoe, and Billy went underwater but didn't check under the canoe, and then the whole thing about Billy never checking the snake bite. But that plays into the ending. And I'm not going to spoil what it is, but these little events are kind of plot convenience for Billy's character. Billy's so smart. Billy's so street smart in this episode. He's much more concise, much more consistent than the book. I just feel like these things with Billy, like, if he was really that street smart, he would check under the canoe, or he would check for a bite, see if these things exist or not. You know what I mean? Like, or something's there or not. Little things like that get under my skin. There's also a thing revealed at the end. There's an obvious real snake used in the episode, but I hate when they do this. They use a real animal and then try to pass it off like a fake animal later on or something like that. Something similar happens here in this episode that just really annoys me. That's a common thing done in like TV and stuff. And of course, the ending itself essentially is the same twist as the book that I really don't like all that much. It's the same exact twist, essentially. It's like coup d'etat moment. The whole entire book gets recontextualized into something different. And essentially, it's the same thing as the book, just a little more context. And I still have issue with it. And it's still kind of like the same magnitude, almost. But for those negatives, strangely enough, like the plot convenience stuff and, you know, annoying little things the episode does with like the live animals, the fake animals, and of course keeping the same twist at the end. I don't think it's all those negatives are that detrimental. Like I deducted 0.1, 0.1, and 0.2 for all three. Not really big things because a lot of the strengths this episode has makes up for its weaknesses. I mean, it's a strong episode. It really is. So from a 0 to 5-star basis, I ended up giving this episode a 4.6 out of 5. I think this book is a great episode. It's not one of my favorites, but it's really good. It's so good. Love it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Welcome to Camp Nightmare, the episode. Let me know down in the comment section, what do you think about Welcome to Camp Nightmare, the episode? Do you love it or do you hate it? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.